Welcome to Authors at Drucker. My name is Dave Specht. I'm the director of the Global Family Business Institute here at the Drucker School of Management. And this is a series organized by the Drucker School Global Family Business Institute at Claremont Graduate University. It's the vision of the Institute to be the global meeting place for the world's most influential business owning families. And today represents what we are really trying to accomplish every day here at the Drucker School Global Family Business Institute. Authors at Drucker is made possible by the generous gift of the James E. Hughes Foundation, and Jay is actually joining us today, so thanks, Jay. The mission of the foundation is rooted in J. Hughes' landmark research on the 5 capitals, and the foundation is really dedicated to the advancing of the field of family governance and generational well-being. Today, we're also joined by Dean Dave Sprott. Allison, if you would highlight Dean Dave, if he's able to join us here, he's going to say a word.
Hi, Dave. Great to see you this morning. Thanks very much.
Good to have you.
And Jay, thank you very much for supporting our series. It's exciting to have such great authors here coming to visit us at the Drucker School. For those of you that don't know much about the Drucker School of Management, we're located outside of LA and anchored in the philosophies of Peter Drucker, which in my view, and of course I'm the dean of the place, so I should say this, I think Peter's ideas are never more important than they are today about the value of human management and really a liberal arts-based education, which is one reason why we're so excited about family business here. Family's all about the connections between people, and the business dimension is very exciting. And we're lucky to have Dave leading the charge. So thanks, Dave. And Dennis, it's good to see you again. I remember your last presentation was exciting, and I look forward to seeing what you have today. Back to you, Dave.
Thanks, Dave. We got a lot of Daves at the Drucker School, so that's Dean Dave. I'm Family Business Dave, and if any other Daves want to join us, we're open to Daves at the Drucker School. Well, the way we're going to run this today is we'll have about 45 minutes of a conversation between Dennis and I, and would love to have your questions for the end. If you could submit those through the chat, that would be the best way for us to facilitate the process. And again, this is the first of a series of interviews. Next month, I'll be joined by Professor Mirsay Rayanu, a professor from the University of Maryland who wrote about the Tata family from India in his book, Tata, the Global Corporation That Built Indian Capitalism. So anyways, very excited about our interviews here. And Dennis, Allison, if you would spotlight Dennis and I, we'll go ahead and get started. So I feel very fortunate to begin with Dennis Jaffe. Dennis is a friend. He's also a senior research fellow at Banyan Global Family Business Advisors. Dennis received his PhD at Yale for 35 years. Dennis was professor of organizational systems and psychology at Saybrook University. He's a regular contributor to Forbes. His global insights on business owning families has taken him all over the world to lecture and consult. He's a prolific writer, a deep thinker, and is one of the most generous people that I've ever met.
Thank you.
Dennis, I really appreciate you joining us today.
Well, I'm so delighted to be here, and I would be remiss if I didn't say that I grew up and was in awe of the work of Peter Drucker, and he was a model for me because he was an academic, but he was a person that really wrote to practitioners and wrote about problems that needed to be solved, not abstract ideas. And his books were so powerful, and every time one came out, we would just kind of devour it and learn from it. So it's just really awesome to be at the Drucker School talking about these issues.
Thank you, Dennis. Well, here at the Drucker School, we one of the professors, Vijay Sathe, has used the term pracademic, and I feel like that's where we try to live, is at the intersection of the practical and the academic, and I feel like you live that out in the work and the writings that you do. And today we're here to talk about Borrowed from Your Grandchildren. I have the book right here.
It's
and
fat.
I guess to get started, Dennis, I'd like to just start with the title itself. I feel like it's a little different than other titles in this space. Where did Borrowed from Your Grandchildren come from?
I was at a conference in Europe, sitting in the audience, and actually a member of the Hermes family was presenting about their fifth generation, and he used the phrase, "You don't inherit a family business; you borrow it from your grandchildren." And all I can say is that gave me goosebumps. It was like, wow, that is so awesome. And then in going further, I found out that actually there was a Native American history and lineage of that idea that you don't own anything; you're really a steward for the future. And to me, the essence of family business is not about it's respecting and building on the legacy of the past, but it's that long-term perspective when you say looking to give to your grandchildren, that you're looking for generations ahead. And that's what family business is about. It's not a business where people are saying, what do we earn this quarter, and what are our results, and how can we increase our profits? It's a business where people are saying, let's look to our legacy, and let's look to future generations and make a contribution, because this is something that we want to be able to give them, and we want to be able to give it to them with pride and with delight. So that's really what this is about for me.
Well, it's always interesting to me to even look at, where do family businesses begin? And that's kind of one of the questions is, when does an entrepreneur then somehow morph into it becoming a family business? And as you look at those first transitions from an entrepreneur having a spark of an idea to something actually becoming a family business, what do you see there, and how does that actually happen?
Well, let me say, first of all, I'm a little bit about getting into this this work. So my approach to research is about looking not at the average and looking at what are the problems to solve, but really looking at what is the best and the models that we have of excellence. And I've been influenced by the excellence books way back in the 80s, and then the Built to Last and Jim Collins's work, where he said, let's look at the best. And in Collins's case, he looked at the best alongside the good and said, what do we learn? So so about 8 years ago, I made a very good career move, which is I retired. And I had a lot of time on my hands because I didn't have any more classes or responsibilities. And so I said, what do I really want to learn? And a lot of families were talking about, what do we do next? And how do we create the next generation? And how do we keep them from being entitled? And what do we give to our children? And how do I sustain the business? And I said, well, how can we learn? Where are the best? And what I wanted to do was to say, well, the best would be families that are successful for more than 3 generations, that are families that are thriving in the 3rd generation, that have moved through all of these different things. And I also wanted to get beyond the US and say, this is a global, every country in the world has family businesses. Let's learn from the families all over the world, like the Tatas, like the families in Japan that have been together for 1,000 years. As a temple builder, KG Industries had been building temples for 1,200 years. Let's learn from them. And so I started traveling and interviewing members of 2 generations of families that were beyond the 3rd generation, that were thriving, not necessarily as a single business, because very few businesses, but they when you sell the business doesn't necessarily mean that you end as a family. And so the families that had continued creating family office, shared investments, basically being tied together as family enterprises.
Yeah.
And so I interviewed 100 families, 20 countries, had a wonderful journey for about 5 or 6 years. Luckily, it was before COVID. And the book actually came out a week before the COVID shutdown. So And so the question comes up, well, looking at 100-year families, what is their message for your original question, which is what are these first generation families? And what they could do is they could look back from the fourth generation and say, aha, here's what we did in generation 1 and 2. Here's what we did to set up the soil for a multi-generational family. And I think their insights are incredibly important.
Yeah. And I think the gift that you've given us with this writing is that we don't have to each personally experience it. We can learn from the experiences of others and where they went right, and what structures they put in place, right, what conversations they had, and how they got to those conversations. And that's why I think this work is so valuable.
And it's interesting. I mean, it isn't that you don't come up with with all this diversity, you don't come up with one thing that they did, or one set of things. And what I've done is I've told stories about these families, about different themes. But what surprised me awesomely is that 100 families all over the world, that there were commonalities, and they were not practices necessarily, but they were themes that came out. And let me talk about one of the first themes that I heard from these families is that the first generation, they do something really wonderful. They set up a successful business, makes lots of money, more than they ever expected, more than they need. And so the second generation and third generation, these families said, we made a second decision, a second choice. And that was, we were going to create a great family. Because after you've created the wealth in the second and third generation, you've got more wealth than anybody can really reasonably use and expect. And the question comes up for these families, they're not sitting around saying, oh, how can we make more? How can we make more? They're sitting around saying, wait a minute, we have all these people. How do we create well-being? And what these families did, and this is really important, after they created the wealth, they said, we want to invest in creating a great family. We want to invest in the future. We want to involve ourselves. We want to ask ourselves, what is this wealth all about? We got it. Now, what's it for?
Yeah.
A mega yacht. What are we going to do with it? And, people say, it's like, I want to, what is it? And so the sense of meaning and what are we for began to come up. And the families created a discussion, and they created an investment. They put money into developing the next generation. And they saw this as an investment. They didn't say, aha, we're going to develop the next generation so we get smart people that'll make us more money in the future. No, they said, we have great opportunity. We have great possibilities, things like that. What can we do for everybody in our future to thrive? What do we want to give the next generations? What do we want to, what meaning do we offer them? What is it that we can do to serve them? And so the idea of what is our wealth for was the overriding question in the second, third generation, not how can we make it? And that was the first thing that came up to me. And related to that, and I think equally important, is the fact that the first generation is a one-of-a-kind person. Usually, in most cases, 99% of the cases, it was one person. In those days, a male, but nowadays it could be male, female, it could be a couple. But they're people that create, and they don't set out to create. They're creators, and they don't answer to anybody. And they simply express themselves and create this edifice. The second or third generation, however, talks about how they had to have a culture change, and they had to go. They didn't go from one person to say, aha, let's make a clone of that person, and let's have let's have our next generation person be another. We're not going to have another entrepreneur. We're not going to have another person. But everybody in the family now has a stake in what happens. Everybody wants a voice. Everybody wants to be involved. And so the next generations are also doing a culture change from the paternalistic, one person, I decide, I take care of you, to a culture where we work together, we collaborate, we create things. We have different leaders. We don't have leadership. We don't have one leader. We have many leaders. We have family leaders. We have philanthropy leaders. We have business leaders. We have investment leaders. We have entrepreneurs. We have, kind of business people. So the family culture shifts. And what I heard from these families is very interesting. This is not a skill that lies in the first generation. First generations are individualists, and they don't have any idea of collective leadership. They don't have any idea of stewardship. They have very, very dim idea of the future. What they see is, let's clone me and create the next generation. So these are not the people that created the next generation. The people that created the next generation are the next generation. Yeah. They created their own leadership. They created their own models. And so I've begun to think that creativity in the family business is not the creativity of the founder, but the creativity in creating the family culture for 2 or 3 generations. And it's a collaborative venture. It's a shared venture. It's family members working together and being creative and all kinds of things that weren't envisioned by the founder, although he made it possible.
Yeah. So Dennis, that brings me to the point of, no, that's good. So that brings me to the point of, when we're talking about trying to put governance structures in place, it seems like it is going to be the rising generation that might encourage, nudge, have ideas, do the research, because the first generation, the entrepreneur, isn't always attuned to those things. And those things aren't maybe the most important thing because they're really focused on building the business. You did talk about, the family and the business. And I think some of these businesses become well known because of their strength and their size. But we say family business, and family is the first word that we use with family business. Talk a little bit about the importance of family in connection to the business, and how do you keep family a priority and truly invest in the family? Because a lot of these businesses are reinvesting in their own business, but some have not taken the steps to actually financially invest in the family or set aside a great deal of time for the development of the family. Can you talk to that for just a second?
Well, you just mentioned 2 things. So you want to create family. I mean, the family are shared owners of something, and the second, third generation grows up. They may have grown up in one town, but then they go other places. Everybody in a family marries a stranger and brings somebody into the family. So every family has new members. Children grow up. And so the question is, by the second or third generation, it isn't a family in the sense of the nuclear family. It's really an extended family, a tribe. And they could be in different countries. They can live in different places. So it's I would almost go so far as to say it's unnatural to have a 3-4 generation extended family, because usually it's entropy. You go out and everybody makes their own way, and you may have some inheritance, but that just helps you along. Whereas the families that we're talking about that have these great entities are kept together artificially. And what I found is that it takes a lot of energy to do that. So first of all, they need leadership and they need commitment. Everybody in the family has to say, well, I can go out and I can have a career and I can have my own family, but I have not just an allegiance to the past and to the resources. I have a commitment. I really like the people in my family. I like my cousins. I've gotten to know them. So they have to get to know each other. They have to have times that they're together. And the families that are successful over generations, they have an annual family meeting of some kind, and the family members get together. And the young people, one person in the thing, she was 70, and she said, "Well, for 65 years, every summer I've been coming and spending time with my cousins and my uncles and my aunt, everything. I really know them well, and I've been part of this. So when we started to create leadership in the family, we all knew each other. We all liked each other, and we knew who was good and who was smart and who was come through and who would flake off and things like that. And so we really knew how to do it. But these families create a family organization. They create, this is where we talk about family councils, and we talk about family governance, which is about the non-financial. This is what Jay has been so helpful in defining non-financial capital, the investment in education, investment in spending time together. I mean, just look at something. Take something like a family that has an annual meeting and they have 80 people. That's a huge cost. And if they're paying for everybody to come and paying for the time and everything, that's that. And then organizing it and doing activities together, those are costs. Those are things that the family has to invest in, and people have to make the time to show up. They can't say, "Oh, go ahead."
They're big investments. We gotta get away from costs, because that's how families look at it. Oftentimes, is costs versus investments, and if they look at the return on human capital for making investments in their family, they'll be pleased with the cost, with the costs that they incur. But I think part of it is the language that we use too, Dennis, and I have to retrain myself as I'm working with families, and to use strategically the right terminology.
Good point, because it didn't. Of course, you have to say, "Hey, we have a lot of money. We have more money than we deserve, than we can use. What do we want to do with it?" And the annual meeting is an example of that. One family that I very, very close to, a very wonderful family, has what they call a social dividend. They have a couple of hundred family members. They're an incredibly successful, diversified family. But they have, for every family member, they invest and say every family member, as a member of this family, as an owner, as an heir of this family, gets a social dividend. Money to buy a house, healthcare, education costs. This is the social dividend that you get because you're born in this family. And the family invests in that. They take money off the top, off of their investments, and they invest in this social dividend to make sure that every family member has this, no matter how much they own, no matter how big or small an owner they are, as a family member, have this social dividend available to them. And other families have other ways of doing that with foundations, trusts, things like that. They make it available. And this is what families say, well, of course, this is what we want to do with our money. If we didn't use our money to develop our capabilities and our opportunities, why do we have it?
Yeah. I was just going to say, one of the things is just articulating it. Why are we doing what we're doing? That goes so far for helping the rising generation to understand the context for why the family's doing what they're doing. And it also helps, to put it in proper context that, these are things that you get for being a part of the family. And,
right.
And then that helps to separate when they're working in the business, you're paid to do a job in the business. And then separate of that, then there are some things you get for just being in the family.
Well, and it's a give and get. There's another side of it, though, and that's what comes up now. This is your benefit, and now question is, what is your responsibility? Mm-hmm. And so you then learn, okay, I am responsible, for example, for coming to the annual meeting. I am responsible for my education. I'm responsible for doing things to support and help the family. If we do, all these families do philanthropy and things like that. I'm responsible for being involved in a family project. Mm-hmm. And so the idea comes with great wealth, comes great responsibilities. And these families define both benefits and responsibilities. And you're a next generation family member, you have to say, I am going to take these responsibilities seriously. I'm going to benefit from the family deal. And there's a kind of a membership commitment that they have to make. And if they don't make it, every family has people that they say, well, they're falling away. They don't communicate. They're not there. They may be owners. They may get some kind of an annual distribution or things, but they're not really members of the family per se.
Yeah.
They're shared investors who happen to be cousins, but they're not in the family enterprise.
Dennis, I wanted to move now to one of the topics that you cover in your book on just resiliency. I love that concept of resiliency, both from a business and a human perspective. Like, how do we build resiliency? And you talk about, in your book, you talk about 4 transformations. And I think these transformations come, during maybe surviving a crisis or having to reinvent the business. But you talk about harvesting, pruning, diversifying, and grounding. Would you mind just spending a little bit of time talking about how to build business resiliency and also maybe some of those transformation points?
Right. Well, let's start with the fact that if you're a 4th generation family business, you're not in the original business that you were 4 generations ago. Yeah. If you started out in the sugar business or growing a crop or building something, you're not doing that anymore. So families sometimes they sell the business, but more often than that, they have a successful business and they bring money out of it. And harvesting means at some point, the amount of money that you've taken out of the business becomes more and more important, and then the size of the business itself. The business brings a return, but you create wealth. And the question that every family has is, do we go off on our own? And how much of that do we just give everybody? Here's your share, here's your share, sure. And how much do we say, here's all this money coming up, let's invest it together. Let's do something that's meaningful to us. And so these successful families have harvesting, which is taking wealth out of the business, even if they continue to own the business or not, or if they sell the business, they have a lot of wealth out. So they have wealth together. So they move from being a operating business family to a financial family.
Okay.
The second thing is one that was very interesting. 100 families I studied, 100%, all 100 families had a mechanism by which a family member could say, I don't want to be part of this family anymore. I love you. We have a great history together. It's a wonderful business, but I want to go off and do what I want. I want to be with my nuclear family. I don't really feel connected to this.
That's pruning, huh?
Pruning is a way of opting out, and means that the people that are remaining are not just a family of blood, they're a family of choice. And if you look at 100 family members, and if those family members don't want to be there, there's nothing much is going to happen together. But if those family members have chosen, so that's the second, is pruning.
I want to just jump in. I find it surprising actually that all 100 had created that path out, because in many of the families I'm working with, they have not done that work of creating a clear path out. And it's a real problem, because they feel, those that are in that don't necessarily want to be in, they feel guilty if they were to raise their hand and say, I want out. So I love hearing that those 100 families have created that path.
And when you look at family fights and family lawsuits and things like that, it's often about people that don't want to be partners. I've worked with families now where you have, two brothers and they don't get along and they've never gotten along in their lives. And it's not like they're up and their children are there and saying, why are they working together? And it's like, one of them, you should buy out the other, or they should divide the business or something. So this is, I believe that if you keep people in and they're prisoners, it's a golden handcuffs, but it's still handcuffs.
Way, yeah.
And they don't want to be part of things. So they're not having fun together, and they don't look forward to the annual meeting. So
that's pruning.
That's pruning.
So let's talk about diversifying and then grounding. Can you explain that?
So then diversifying is a lot of family members have been very disappointed by the fact that they had a business and it was great for a generation, and it began to peter out, and they have more and more family members. So the challenge in a family is they don't want to be dependent on just one asset. And so over time, the family, if it's staying together, they're reinvesting money. By definition, they're putting money back in. They're not giving it all out. So they have shared investments. So they begin to create an investment philosophy. They begin to look for entrepreneurship in the next generations. They buy other businesses. One family, again, that's incredibly successful, went from being sugar mills and commodities to now they're a family with 100 family members, and they have a marketplace, and they bring investments in, and they have a huge family office that brings investments, and every time they bring in investment, so everybody shows up to the meetings because they bring in some investments, and then they present the investment, and family members can say, I'm in, I like that, I don't like that, and they own about 50 or 60 businesses. But they create energy in the fourth and fifth generation because of this marketplace, and because of the incredible deals that they get, and the incredible opportunities that they have, not because of their original family business.
Fascinating.
So that's diversifying, and that's what happens when you put money in to the business rather than take it out. And the fourth one, which is very, very important, is that each generation has more and more people, and the question is, who are we? Do we have a shared identity? And this is about culture, and it's about the family having a shared identity. What do we stand for? What are our values? Very often, the values become more philanthropic over generations, and they're known more for what they give than what they've done in their legacy business. So the question of having a shared identity is the glue that keeps them together. Otherwise, everybody's going to go off, and just making money together doesn't make you friends, and doesn't make you want to be connected to each other. So those are the four things. And what I find is that families evolve, and each generation there's a new situation and a new thing, and the family has to reinvent itself to manage what it is now, not what it was in the past.
Yeah, fantastic. I want to move to a different topic, one that I feel like is really a big challenge, which is developing owner mindset in the rising generation.
Mm-hmm.
Again, in the first generation, it's pretty easy to understand. Like, if the business is successful, the entrepreneur will make money, but if it's not, there won't be much money. In the second generation, oftentimes the parental role of protect from risk is still there, and the second generation oftentimes is protected from that risk for as long as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we help families to have an ownership mindset across generations? What have you seen these families do that you interviewed, and how can we help?
Well, entrepreneurship has been a central focus of family business research, and it's very interesting. For the first 20 years of the field, we were talking about succession as if the business just goes on, and the big thing you need is to have a next generation leader that continues the business. Businesses don't last forever, so now we're focusing on entrepreneurship, and I think there's a shift that takes place in the family, in each of these families, that the entrepreneur doesn't really understand, which is a shift from being an owner operator to being an owner. And owner mindset is meaning does not necessarily mean you are an owner operator. Over generations, fewer and fewer people in the family work in the family business, if there's even a family business. But the next generations are what we call opportunists. And here's a thing that I've seen is the family creates, and I call this the generative alliance. There's three different stakeholder groups that grow up in the family. There's the legacy elders, who are the founders and the leaders, and they have the ownership, and they bring on professionals, professional family office managers, professional business people, but these are people that are not risk takers, and they're what I call craftsmen. They're great professionals, but they're not risk-oriented, and they basically continue the legacy, and they just do it really well. So these are advisors, non-family managers, executives, and some family members that continue the work. Then there's a third group, and this third group only exists in a family business. They don't exist in other businesses. This is a group of next generation people who expect to be leaders and are next generation, and look at who they are in the family. They've been educated. The family has used its wealth to educate them. They've traveled all over the world. They're part of networks. They learn the new technology, not the old technology. They're excited. They're socially responsible. They're looking at environmental problems and social problems, and they want to be part of solving them. They're in touch with networks of peers and groups and other wealthy families and social ventures and things like that. They're incredibly valuable, these next generation people, and they're not like the craftsmen. They're risk takers. They're seeking new opportunities. They're entrepreneurs, and these families have got to make the three groups work together. Each group could go off on its own. So the elders, the legacy people, the craftsmen who are good business people and good people, and the entrepreneurial opportunists in the next generation have to create an alliance where they each of them use their talents and use their focuses. And the entrepreneurial group can't just run off and do everything new. They have to respect the legacy. There's a family office. There's there's things that they do well that they need to do. And this is the generative family, is the resilient family that they innovate. And I asked an interesting question. I asked each of these families, so what were the 2 or 3 greatest innovations over the 4 generations, and where did they come from? And this is very interesting. A lot of our mindsets are, the older generation are the innovators. No, 2/3 of the major innovations, the most important things in the family, came from the younger generations, and they were sold into the family. They didn't go out and say, I'm going to start my own business. They could. They said, I want to bring this opportunity to the family. I want to innovate in the family. And the innovation came from the younger generation with the support and the funding of the older generation and the craftsmen, the advisors. And so they worked together. So that was how innovation took place in these families. And family, non-family businesses don't have this next generation group of educated, entrepreneurial, value-based, creative, caring people to create innovation. So family businesses are set up to be more resilient sometimes than public corporations and other kinds of businesses.
Yeah, I can't think of a better place for entrepreneurial ventures to be born than inside of a family business that already has support system, capital, people, networks. But honestly, Dennis, I don't think those stories are told. The media does not tell those stories.
Well, media loves negative stories. They love to hear about, Succession, the TV show, and, terrible stories about families. And I'll tell you a story. I was visiting, I can say it, it's not the Wall Street Journal about 25 years ago. And I was saying, well, how come you have all these negative stories about families? And the person for the Wall Street, that's our policy. We don't tell positive family stories. They're not interesting. People don't want to read them.
Wow.
We only want to talk about family conflict. And it's like, well, that's why all of our mindsets about families have all these negative imprints and all these negative things, and families feel like they're all dysfunctional. They're all these, they're going to fall apart, rather than these wonderful stories. And that's why stories, there were stories of families, biographies. I have a bookshelf over there with 200 different family histories. These stories need to be told, because the good ones, they just don't get out in the same way.
They need to be told. They need to be celebrated, for sure. Dennis, I wanted to just spend a little bit of time on family governance. You've spent a lot of time writing about family governance, and I'm interested in the elements of family governance, specifically, solving the challenge of shared ownership, shared decisions. And you talk about those elements as transparency that lead to agreements, that lead to accountability, and there's boundaries, and then councils. I guess as you think about a family that's just beginning to put some governance structures in place, what advice would you give for creating that level of transparency, and where to start with agreements? Because they need to exist to just solve a problem, correct?
Right. Well, so governance is a solution to a problem. So when a family says we need a family constitution, it's like, well, it's not one size fits all. So the question is, I've had families come and say, we got a family constitution that was written by our advisor or our lawyer or something. And it's like, how do we use it? And the whole point is that people write these constitutions, and who's going to use it if they don't understand it?
Yeah.
So the governance, when I begin to see it, is, so there's agreements. And where the agreements come from, they have to come from groups of family members creating them. So there's a yin and a yang between the councils creating the agreements, and the agreements are coming to agreement and writing them down and saying, here are our rules and processes. But that can't happen. And again, at the top is transparency, because in a family, even in a family business, the older generation has a paternalistic thing, and they tend to have the information, and younger generation can't create agreements and move forward without having information. So family businesses have to begin by sharing information, by not just giving a big book with numbers, but really telling people how it works, telling people, sharing the information, talking about how it's going to work, and then there's information is shared. Then a group of people gets together and says, we're going to create now it's getting really complicated. We have a number of different assets. We're not owner operators anymore. We're owners. We're hiring people and have advisors to do it. We have to begin to create organization, and we have a non-financial agenda. We have to create now a family council to do our philanthropy, to do our family meetings, to create family education programs, family development, to do the things that we want to do as a family, to manage our vacation homes, and to do educational things together. So they create a different, they create a family
council, maybe.
Council. Yep. They create an ownership group. They create a board of directors, and this comes together and becomes the governance. Governance, though, has to have, first of all, it has to have roles. If you are an owner in a family business, just like an owner of a corporation, I own a share of Apple. I can't walk into Apple headquarters. I can't even get into Apple headquarters, let alone tell people what to do. But somehow family members, because they're family, they think they have these rights, but they don't. And so they have to understand the role of an owner. They have to understand the role of a family council member, the role of these things, and they have to be accountable to each other. If you say you're going to do it, or if you're on the family board, you are accountable for the results, and you have to share the results. Yep. So governance is a system of organization to make these things possible. And you've got 50 people, you've got different entities, you've got investments, you've got philanthropy. You need organization. Just as we were talking earlier, you need to invest. There's a lot of work, a lot of costs, and a lot of things to maintain the structure. It just doesn't, you don't wind it up and it goes off on its own. It needs
So Dennis, I've taken maybe more time than I should. We're getting into the Q&A, sir. And I would love for the audience to be able to ask some questions here before we run out of time.
Right.
One question came in from the chat. from Adam Hoffman. What are some favorite rituals you've seen in families? This one's for you, Dennis.
Well, here's a wonderful one. This family has a beautiful ranch, and every summer people come in the ranch, and they have a ceremony for people in the family who turn 18 and become full members of the family. And they have another ceremony for people that marry in to the family, where they present and they talk about what they're bringing from their family, what gifts they have to the family. It's very, kind of a ritualized thing of coming in and joining and becoming a full member and everything. And those kinds of rituals, they build, first of all, respect for people coming into the family. And it isn't, we signed a prenup and this and that. And it's I'm really welcomed into this family. It's a coming of age ritual. These kinds of things build the family culture.
Beautiful.
So that's one that I think of.
Thank you. Another question that came in, this one was from Steffi. She talked about the Patagonia family announcing that they're giving away
Wonderful.
the company. You talk in your book about corporate responsibility, and this is not new for business owning families. Maybe do you want to talk about, is this, I mean, this is a little bit new in terms of giving away the corporation for that benefit, but do you want to speak to that?
No, I mean, families have an enormous amount of money, and when the family gives away, Chouinard family gives it away, that doesn't mean the family members are going to be poor. They probably have a family fund to fund education and and different family ventures, but they have so much money that they give it. So there are huge philanthropic ventures by family members, and somehow it doesn't make the family poor. So to give away the company, I'm sure that they probably have a family office, and they have family investments, and they have other family land that they've kept and things like that. So it's a both and. But but with this foundation that he's created for the land, I'm sure family members there'll be a place for them to be involved in it. I'm sure there'll be ways in which they can still be part of the business, and they can be part of building the land, which has been his mission since he started the business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful.
It's a great story, and it's a wonderful example of what family enterprise can do. He didn't have any other investors that he had to get signed off. I assumed he's talked about it within his family. I assume so. Conversation, and it was a shared decision, not a one single decision. But that's what I would assume.
Sure. Okay. The next question comes actually from our good friend Jay Hughes, and he wanted to see if you wanted to talk about inversion. Jay, Jay, do you want to provide more context for that? Let's see. I may have put Jay on the spot.
First of all, I wanted to thank the two of you. I had no idea my voice would be heard. But seeing so many friends has been extraordinary today. And Dennis, as always, the wisdom that comes from your work is extraordinary. I was just jumping in, Dennis, you were mentioning that there were families always had more members. One of the things you may recall, Dennis, that you and I talked about, and Dave and I have, has been that with the tremendous change in demography all over the world, not just in America, but all over the world, I think there are going to be a lot of families that are going to have empty branches through choice, not necessarily through Holocaust or disease, but through choice. And I'm a little curious whether any of the families that you work with have been thinking about that, given that they're 100 years old at least, and they've lived through the great increase of population. I'm curious only because I think it's a subject that all of us are going to be dealing with if we look at the next 100 years. So that's the reason for the question.
I mean, again, things change so quickly. In the 100-year study, that didn't come up at all. Neither did the longer lifespans and some of the demographic things that we're changing. And I think that that's making families, I mean, I think the things I see families doing is, first of all, not creating perpetual foundations.
Yeah.
They're saying, wait a minute, I don't have any confidence in 3 generations from now there being anything, so I might as well see the money go now to making a difference in the rainforest rather than the rainforest in 3 generations. So I see that. I see families just making a major, saying we're going to make a major change in something right now, and we don't need to keep maintaining greater and greater amounts of wealth for our next generations. We really need to think about the family is not just our immediate family; it's the family of humanity.
Dennis,
that I see.
This is the principle of spend up.
Yeah,
which is not the subject of today, but is an idea for everybody to hear, is how do you spend up, not spend down? That's a really, really interesting question. And I think it has to do both with foundations and also with individual branches.
Yeah.
If that branch is going to disappear, does it have an opportunity to think about spending up within? So that was really so. Enough of Jay. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay.
Incredible today.
Thank you, Jay. Last question, Dennis, and then I think we'll need to probably wrap up. This one comes from Danielle Luton, and she asks, what ideas do you have to get the matriarchs and patriarchs to engage with the rising generation, to prepare them, to inform them? Do you have some techniques, or how have these 100 family, from the study, how have they engaged their rising generation? How do you help the matriarchs and patriarchs?
This is a tough one, and this is one that the wealth advisory field is dealing with all the time. As they come to the wealth advisor and they say, "Help me! I want to create a trust so that my kids don't get entitled." And it's kind of like, wait a minute. Your kids, how old are your kids? Oh, they're 18, 22, 25. It's like, well, do you talk to them? What do you, are they responsible? Are they entitled? And somehow I think the advisor has to point out that you don't do it for them, you do it with them, and that you have to keep. I think advisors do this job by saying, let's have a family meeting and talk about this. Let's not make a plan, an estate plan, and say, you'll find out what it is when I die. Let's have a family discussion and talk about what we want to see in the future. And that's actually the first step to creating family governance when you get right down to it. And so this is a problem, is people think about, they're the parents, and it shouldn't be, they shouldn't feel like it's dangerous to get in a room and talk to their kids honestly and openly. That's not dangerous. That's actually what parents are supposed to do. Yeah. And wealthy parents have a lot, so they have a lot to talk about.
Well, I'm afraid that many, the rising generation, feel like the plans that have been put in place are plans that are being done to them rather than being done for them or with them. And that's a completely different experience. And I think provides a story about the money, a story about the wealth that is not the story that most families want to tell.
This is where, this is where my 60s history comes out. And I've talked to third, fourth generation groups. I say, well, you could get together and you can actually make some requests and initiate. You can initiate the family meeting with your parents, and you can say, I understand you have these decisions in the estate plan, but we'd like to talk to you about some of the things that we see and some of the concerns we have and some of the questions. And it's kind of it's kind of the leadership from the younger generation. This is how innovation happens in the family. Sometimes the younger generation says, hey, parents, ooh, here we are. We have ideas. We're responsible. We're not a bunch of spendthrifts, and we actually care. Oh, and it's the innovation can come from the third generation up to the second generation rather than the second generation planning for the third generation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dennis, with that, I think we're going to go ahead and close. I'm going to share my screen real quick. I want to just share a couple of highlights that we have going on at the Drucker School. We have created a certificate program in advising family enterprises. This one is really directed at advisors. Another thing that we're excited about at the Drucker School is a masterclass that it's called the Generational Wealth Masterclass, and it was in partnership with Jay Hughes, featuring some topics that Dennis and Jay have worked on together. A couple of those we'll tease here: becoming families of affinity, redefining wealth, navigating financially diverse relationships, appreciating and onboarding in-laws, and the pitfalls and perils and possibilities of shared ownership. So if you have interest in any of those, feel free to reach out to me. You can send me an email. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. And then just to wrap it up, are some of the upcoming authors that we have next month. Again, Mircea Raianu will talk about Tata and his learnings of studying that family. And anyways, I hope you'll join us every month for this wonderful conversation, and would love to get your feedback on today's session. I'm always trying to personally improve, and ultimately I want to create a great experience for you. I want to celebrate business owning families. I want to be able to tell their stories. And anyways, I appreciate, again, the James E. Hughes Foundation for funding this project, Authors at Drucker. And again, thank you all for investing your most precious resource, which is your time. Have a great day.
Wonderful people getting together. Thank you, Dave, for the opportunity to do this. And it was a wonderful exchange.
Thank you, Dennis. Appreciate it. Have a good day, everyone.
Take care.